Hello, Sat Sri Akal.
Hello, Sat Sri Akal.
Well, can I just say, it's just such a lovely time. It feels lovely to be part of all this. Thank you, just to be Mahal. It's really lovely for all of us to bring together. And I'm really looking forward to this morning.
I am as well. And thank you absolutely to Dr. Mal for organizing this, for the initiative that she's taken. It's brilliant.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I was just waiting for Ramneek to join us. Maybe he'll join us a bit later. So, well, thank you very much, everyone. I think the only person that we're waiting for now is Ramneek. Everyone else is here. So, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
I was saying to Amardeep earlier on that I feel so honored to be part of this project with yourselves, because I know all of you one-to-one, but this is the first time I'm actually seeing you all together, and that feels really exciting. It feels very powerful because I know just how much wisdom and how much experience you all bring to the table here. So let me just remind you of the purpose of the project. The Learn to Lead project is exploring the question about how do Sikh social cultural stories, our symbols, our values, and the principles that we learn from Sikhi, how do they inform our leadership skills? And you all know me, my name is Jasveer, and you know where I live. I live in Birmingham, and Bully knows that I lived in London for a long time. I was in London for about 30 years. I grew up in Stafford, and I was born in the Punjab, you know, so we share that together. So let me just begin, first of all, by asking you to introduce yourselves, and I'll go from the order that I have on my screen here. So Amardeep, first of all, if you could just introduce yourself, tell us where you are. Well, I know where you are, but just that everyone else knows where you are as well, and what you do, what the work that you're involved in.
Yeah, so thank you, Jasveer, for organizing this. And it's, you know, we've been talking, as you said, one-on-one basis, and it's great to see a broader group of people here. I'm based in Singapore. My name, you know it, Amardeep Singh. What do I do? I mean, I'm just following my heart for the last 7 years, having been on the treadmill for 25 years. By background, I'm an engineer. I've done an MBA from University of Chicago. I've worked for 25 years in the corporate, of which 21 years with American Express. I've led the regional Asia Pacific team for revenue management, but all that is a blurry history. I don't even associate with it, right? And what I've been doing for the last 7 years is I'm basically seeing myself as a non-qualified, non-academic qualified person, following his heart, going into the areas where our community has chosen not to be getting into, not because we don't want to, but just that because it's so hard and risky to get into, and trying to document the legacy footprints which our forefathers have left back. And in the process, I've done 2 books called Lost Heritage, The Sikh Legacy in Pakistan. Way back in 2014 was the Explorations, mapping across 36 cities and villages, the footprints of the legacy remnants. I did a follow-up, The Quest Continues, Lost Heritage, Sikh Legacy in Pakistan, which is mapping the remnants in 90 cities and villages. And I'm trying to increase the awareness of our Punjabi Sikh community, which I think has boxed our faith. And I see our faith is an Indus faith. I've spent a lot of time in Balochistan, Sindh, Kashmir, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Afghanistan, mapping all these things. And for the last 3 years, we have been on a massive project whereby we are producing this 24-episode documentary called Allegory, a Tapestry of Guru Nanak's Travels, essentially replicating the entire journey of Guru Nanak's footsteps across 9 nations and representing it to the world in the form of a revelation of the metaphoric messages that he left at each place, a beautiful interfaith narrative, which unfortunately we as a community have boxed Nanak inside the white and marble gurdwaras, but his soul actually was in the interfaith sites that he visited and the dialogues that he had. So that's what we want to present. It should be out by the end of this year. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Amardeep. And Virpal, if I could go to you next.
I'm based in, sorry.
Virpal.
Virpal Singh ji.
My name is Gurpal Singh. I am based in Auckland, New Zealand. And before moving to New Zealand 17 years ago, I was working as assistant editor for Institute of Sikh Studies in Chandigarh. And before that, I did my engineering from Punjab Engineering College. The work that I do and the process through which I moved from engineering to the history and history research is quite strange for me. And I see that some invisible hand was guiding me towards it. And I have never regretted even a moment of what I have done in the last 20 years. In New Zealand, I am running an organization called the Sikh Center, which does research, continues the research in Sikh history and does advocacy for our community. And compared to Canada, UK, and America, obviously the community is quite young in New Zealand, and about 100 to 200 families who arrived in New Zealand from 1890 to 1985, 1990, in that 100-year period. They didn't have that kind of grounding in the Sikh ethos to pass it on to the next generations. And at some point, it seems to have been weakened by the laws of New Zealand itself, because it had strange laws that if it's a girl born or raised in New Zealand and she got married to a guy from, let's say, Punjab, then she had to leave Punjab to live in, leave New Zealand to live in Punjab. She couldn't bring her husband here. And if it was a man, then he could marry and bring a wife to New Zealand. And those kind of strange laws, which upset the whole dynamics, and they stayed in force till about 1988. So once those laws were got rid of by the government of the time, that's when most of the Sikh migration to New Zealand has happened. So today, if we number around 25,000 to 40,000, that huge difference is because of the change in methodology for the last census, which has been questioned by many experts. So there's a difference. The data says it's about 40,000 Sikhs in New Zealand at the moment, but the huge difference between two censuses is about 20,000. So there is kind of the our own community estimates are that we are around 30,000 rather than 40,000. So you can see that before 1990, there were about 250 Sikh families in New Zealand, and after 1990, in these 30 years, we have increased to about 30,000 people. And that tells that the community and the Sikh presence and the ethos are mostly Punjab centric. And so that's what I'm trying to navigate here through the organization and through my work, that whatever problems new migrants face in the disconnect between how we were raised and how we are supposed to navigate an alien system. So that's about it, and I'll yield. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Virpal Singh. Arvinda, could I speak with you next? Ask you to introduce yourself.
Sure. Firstly, it's great to be here and see everyone. My journey is a bit unique in the sense that I'm still starting off. I'm quite young still. I'm still at university. I'm basically embarking on a degree apprenticeship course, so it's full-time work and full-time uni at the same time. So I'm studying business management and social change, which is sort of business management, but more in the context of charity senior leadership. I'm also working for Scouts, which is a youth charity. One thing that's quite unique actually is that we see that Scouts is it's not very diverse in terms of its membership and also its employee workforce. Majority would say that it's more associated with like a white middle class that's the sort of perception it has. And one of the reasons I'm actually on this course is to help increase the diversity, inclusion, and equality in that area. And so I'm basically embarking on this journey in the next 4 years, and essentially just to sort of train me up to be a leader in the future. But yeah, that's basically it for now.
Okay,
So.
thank you, Arvinder. And I met Arvinder in London, which, you know, my heart is still in London. So when I meet people like yourself who are the future leaders, I feel very inspired. Thank you very much. Ramneek, if I could go to you now.
Thank you, Dr. Malji. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. I'm taking this call from holiday 6 hours north of Sydney, where I'm usually based. But it's a place called Coffs Harbour, and it's a very special place in the Australian Sikh community because there's a large farming community here in Coffs Harbour. By way of introduction, I'm professionally a strategy consultant by day, and in my position as a community leader, I'm co-founder and chair of the Young Sikh Professionals Network, where a Sikh community organization that was founded in Sydney in 2012 as part of a larger organization called Sikh Youth Australia. And we have been operating across Australia and New Zealand since. And our mission is to channel Seva to create ethical Sikh leaders for a productive and more inclusive broader Australian and New Zealand society. And we do that through several mechanisms. We host networking events, we host mentoring programs, we host a leadership fellowship development program, which we're currently producing at the moment. We also do advocacy across other multicultural organizations, as well as the Australian government and corporate organizations. And we share good news stories to give people a stronger sense of faith in their self-identity, which was one of the core reasons why we were developed based in 2012, based on some observations. And I think a lot of people have spoken about some of the intricate challenges that led to their participation in community organizations. So I won't touch too much on that, but I'm happy to talk about that later as we get on to other aspects of the discussion.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Ramneek Singh. Gurch, how about you?
I'd say good morning, but I now realize with all the different time zones, it's going to be good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. So absolute pleasure to be here. I'm Gert Randhawa. I'm a professor of diversity and public health here in England. I live in a place called Harpenden. It's sandwiched in between St Albans and Luton. You're most welcome to pop in and say hello if you ever land at Luton Airport, or Heathrow's not far. What do I want to say? I do a lot of work with faith communities around promoting health and social care. I'm on the board of Forestry England, which is all about increasing public use of forests. So I'm very keen to explore links between faith communities, climate change, tree planting. And if you like, my hobby horse, which is how I met Jasveer and heard about her inspirational work, is how can we use faith spaces to, and this is probably a bit controversial, to go back to the principles of religion. So if I can use Gurdwaras as an example, if you have a basic healthy langar, that would be wonderful for promoting health and well-being. But my observation is many Gurdwaras don't serve a healthy langar. But I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Next, let's go to Bully. Bully, I know from my work in London, I used to work with, we were colleagues a long time ago. Bully, if I could ask you to introduce yourself to the group.
Hi, I'm nothing as inspiring as all of you. You know, I'm in awe of all what you're all doing. Really glad to be talking to you now. I met Jasveer at the college where we both used to work many, many years ago. Since then, I've done an MBA from Thames Valley University, and then I've done various different sectors. I've worked, retired from the NHS as a managing partner a couple of years ago, and now I'm a happy grandmother and spending time with my grandchildren. come from a very, very religious family. My dad was one of the first guys to start doing account parts in the UK. And we've always had Guru Amar Das Ji at a house. Unfortunately, after I got married, we didn't have Babaji in our house, but my dad was like, we learned a lot from him, to say the least, in terms of like, he was one of the first Panj Pyare in England when they first did the Vaisakhi Mela, you know, like they do the Yatra. And he took many, many trips, coach people to Hemkund Sahib. He was the first one to start that. So he was very well known. And what I'm trying to say is learned a lot about Sikhi from him. He was very, very practical. He was never, he never said, you mustn't do this. It was always like explaining what the Sikhi meant to us. And thanks to him, you know, my children were very inspired by him as well. And they are into Sikhi as well. Other than that, I will answer the questions or speak about things about how I feel. I don't really feel I can say a lot more. I live in Windsor, which is, I'm sure you've heard of it. It's not too far from Heathrow. There's a tiny village here called Datchet. So we live here. And yeah, that's me.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Bali. And Sukhchandan?
I will say good morning and Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. What a pleasure it is this morning to be part of this discussion. And I have to say, I already feel comfortable. I feel very part of this group before even knowing you. I think that surely shows how Sikhi connects us. Language connects us. I think we have it already connected through this. So as I said, I am Sukhchandan Palkaur. Mom loved long name, so always had a Pal in one of 8. I was born and brought up in India, in the Punjab, a small village called Nangla, which is in district Sangrur, Malwa, which is very few people live, have migrated from Malwa to the UK. I remained in India for the first 20 years of my life. My young childhood was quite a, there were 2 facets of it. There was a very traditional life in terms of the village life, the structure, the community structure, the society structure, the roles that girls were assigned to. Then I had parents who had really very high aspirations to educate their children and make sure that, and that especially the daughters, that they will be independent. So I kind of lived a double life. I had these high aspirations whilst fitting into this quite strict structure that you needed to. So I always had to do learn all the task chores that all girls had to do, because the expectation where you get married and you become a wife, and then you become a mother, you daughter-in-law, all of those. And childhood was seen as a kind of transitory period to prepare you for something else. And that I think has quite an impact on you, because in how you look after your own needs, because it's almost really that other people's needs have to come first, you have to come second. But then, like Dr. Mahal, my mother had aspiration that I would become a doctor. Didn't get the grades, but I made into the Indian Army as in military nursing service. As I was getting close to my commissioning to be a lieutenant, my destiny brought me to the UK. And that's where I have been for nearly 40 years. On the 26th of April, it'll be total, I will spend 40 years of exile. But I had to make this exile my home.
Okay, so great. Let me go on to Sukhi then.
Okay, I will come back, yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, there's plenty more to say. But Sukhi is another friend of mine that I met while I was living in London. So I've known him for a few decades as well. Sukhi, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. The name is Sukhdeep, a name that's been butchered outside the Sikh community for the last 40 years. So that's why I go by the name of Sukhi now. Basically, I have a background in technology, and I've been in the technology field for over 40 years now, currently working in the space industry. I guess where I am is I'm probably not as accomplished as a lot of people on this call in terms of the journey with Sikhi, both from an academic point of view, but also from a personal point of view. I think as I was growing up, and I'm mid-50s now, when I was growing up in England, in a small town in Kent, there was a sizable Sikh community, but our view and understanding of Sikhi and even Sikhi leadership was very limited and boxed in. So I'm pretty much on a journey now of, in the later part of my life, to understand what Sikhi actually means, and sort of who are the leaders that I have been looking up to, predominantly men actually in Sikhi, but I think part of this conversation I'd like to focus on some of the female leaders that we may or may not have heard of. But that's me and who I am and what I'm doing and what I want to do for the rest of my life in terms of my own personal pursuits.
Okay, thank you very much, Sukhdeep. And you did introduce yourself to me as Sukhi, so I didn't butcher your name.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay, and last but not least, Sukhjinder Kaur ji.
Angie, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to come to this panel. I really don't see myself, as I said before, as a leader, but it's good to see others have perceived me that way. The name's Sukhjinder Kaur Dillon, born and raised in Birmingham, lived some time in Canada, United States, and then now in good old Coventry. I work as a manager for BT currently. I've had several middle management, if I can call it, roles. Started out as a court reporter in the law courts in England and did the same in Canada as well. My Sikhi journey started when a Gurudwara was built on Soho Road in Handsworth, Birmingham. And I was taken there to learn Punjabi, and from there it sort of spiraled. And even though I was very much in this Western world and went off and did things as any young person would, there was always a boundary that had been created because of my teachings and the people that had been around. And I suppose I had a real awakening at the age of 25 when I reached out to my guru, and I've never looked back. I'm now in my 50s and I've embarked on a journey which has really, as somebody earlier said, I think it was Virbal Singh Ji, it was like all this miraculous hand that's over us and guides us and takes us to places we would never dream of being. I've worked with all the Indian TV channels, the Sikh channels in the UK. Currently, I'm a presenter with Sangat TV alongside my full-time job. And I've had the opportunity to be on the committee in the Gurudwaras, teach young people, kirtan, empower women, run female empowerment shows for Sangat TV. So I feel like this was not maybe my chosen path, but somebody's put me on this path, and I've run with it, and I will continue to run with it if it means it's of benefit to others.
Okay, thank you very much. You've all expressed very inspiring stories. So now let me go back to the core essence of the question that we're exploring about how do stories influence us. The stories that you've shared are obviously influencing people around you. And we have been influenced by stories that we heard from our childhood. When I've spoken with you individually, you've all given me some stories that were most influential in your lives. Let me go to Amardeep again now. So Amardeep, could you tell us about one story that was pivotal in your journey through life, and how did that inspire you? What influence did it have? What impact has it made on your life? So Amardeep, please.
Well, life is full of stories, and the way I look at my life in the present avatar is I'm creating stories, whether it be a story in the form of legacy research and documentations, or be in the form of the documentary that we're doing, the multi-episode. It's a story of Guru Nanak. Actually, in this whole process, as an evolution that has happened from a time when I was in the corporate, it seemed it was all about you, but as you evolved and you come to this stage in the last 7 years, I think this is where the transformation is happening. And you realize that it's not you who's important. It's not your story that's always important. It's the stories that you have to tell that's important. And you just, as you keep progressing in life, you realize you're just an instrument of delivery, because when divine actually creates these opportunity, opens the doors, allows you to go across in places where others would, or generations have actually been dying to experience, then you realize slowly that you start giving up your own ego and you transcend your own stories and go to a bigger story. But then you are asking about my story. For me, the simplest thing that has actually probed me to walk this path after 25 years of corporate career and walk away passionately and deliver something is one story of my father, I mean, who came from Muzaffarabad. Our entire families, which came from Kashmir in Pakistan, and what we heard from them when they came into UP in India, what they lost, the massacres that happened out there, and the various a lot of people in our extended family who got impacted, distant aunt being left there, and having grown up as a Muslim in a society where she was adopted as a 5-year-old child. These things have had an impact on you somewhere deep down, not consciously, but a deep down impact, which as you progressed in your corporate career has has remained, deeply seeded, and you've been just guided by that seed to probe yourself into various aspects of creativity and skills developments and knowledge layering, that when the time became right, the story that was seeded certainly started opening doors and windows. And I think the story that I think about my life as an outcome of this whole seeding is that if you have done your part of showing to the divine energy that you are passionate enough, is the story that I say that the divine starts opening the gates by embracing you, and then rationality ends. And it's all about you are insignificant, and what you deliver for the next generations is the story you want to leave ahead. It's not about your story.
Okay, thank you. And Virbal Singh Ji, would you like to tell us about you can either comment on somebody who's spoken previously or tell us about the story that influenced you. So if I could move on to Virbal Singh Ji.
I, in this context that we are speaking about, of coming together and feeling as a family coming together, and that feeling in itself is so important for our community. And the kind of breaks in our community as a whole are having a really adverse impact on how we have progressed in the last about 70, 80 years in post 1947. The story in that context that I would like to cite as an inspiration is the story of the third Guru, organizing the whole community after the first two Gurus and setting up these Bai Manjiyan and Pide, which was that there were 22 provinces in the third Guru's time in South Asia, the 22 major principalities or regions. And he established those Bai Manjiyan, that each region had its own Sikh representative. And then he had these minor representatives called Pide. So he established those in the significant places, but which were part of a region, but they still had some significance, whether political or religious or cultural. And he established those Pide in there. So that whole organization had a huge impact in spreading or maintaining the sanctity of the Sikh doctrine, which Guru Nanak had established. So those that kind of foresight seems to be missing today, and that is what kind of makes me think of that time, that story, which then inspires me that we need that kind of thinking processes today in order to bring our community together in the whole world, just as Guru Amar Das Ji had connected the whole community through these Bai, Manjiya and Pide.
Absolutely. I think that it's through these stories, through sharing these stories and through having spaces like we're creating now, where we can have discussions. We're so dispersed, we're scattered all around the world. And so we need to make an effort to come together and to share. Okay. Thank you very much, Virwal Singh Ji. And let me go back to Arvinda now.
Sure. I think I should give a bit of context before I dive into the stories. So I was never really into Sikhi, and nor was my family. We were just like a typical sort of Punjabi family, eat meat, dad drinks alcohol and stuff. So I think it was in 2018 when my sister somehow encouraged me to watch the Four Sahibzade movie on the TV. And I was really reluctant. I was just playing my video games on my PS4 and stuff. And then basically we watched it and everything changed. And I always thought, I said, how could 48 Singhs fight against, you know, a million forces? And it would, you know, the thought of that would, like, I'll just keep thinking about it for weeks and weeks. And then we started to go to basic Sikhi. There was, because I'm from Hounslow, they have, they do Gatha on Sundays, and we go visit them, and we'd meet Sangat and such. But it wasn't until 2019 when I went to a Sikh camp, and that's what really changed me, experiencing Amrit Villa and being in Sangat of amazing Guru Sikhs and stuff. So 2019 onwards, that's basically when I sort of adopted Sikhi. But in terms of story that really sort of inspired me, I'd probably say the Four Sahibzade, both, you know, the birthday Sahibzade, the shorter Sahibzade as well. It really it was a massive turning point, especially because I was in college, and you know how college can be. It completely changed my perspective of everything. Even my friends were like, "Whoa, you know, you've changed, man. What's wrong?" But yeah, that for me, that was the sort of grassroots of my Sikhi. But in terms of coming to Sikhi now, learning about the history, the sort of early sort of 18th century, the periods after Guru Gobind Singh Ji, and you know, learning about the sort of the conditions that we were faced with, and how the Mughal Empire was essentially sort of butchering us every opportunity. We had a price on our head, and hearing the inspiring stories about how the Singhs used to fight in jungles and used to hide in caves, but yet they were still resilient, and they still showed fight, and they had determination to keep the caste of Mount going. And then all the way to the Sikh Empire, you know, the I think it was in the early 19th century, I think it was. It's just really inspiring just to see like our ancestors were really brave considering the circumstances. But I think an important point that we should mention is that, you know, without these stories, you know, the generations to come won't know about it. And even as a kid, like I was completely, I had no idea about what had happened. I just knew there was 10 gurus. We weren't allowed to cut our hair. That's basically all I knew. But stories are definitely powerful, and I think there's a shabad in Gurbani. I can't remember off by heart, but it's on the lines of that, telling stories of our ancestors make good children. And I think that's the generation today, especially I look at my sort of generation. We're always on social media, TikTok and Instagram and stuff. I think we could definitely do with more virtuous people in my sort of generation.
That's right. And those stories are part of our culture. And we can see throughout history that the strongest cultures have the strongest stories, and those with the strongest cultures survive. So the core essence of the story about the Four Sahibzade, what was the core message for you in that story? How did that lead you into this, you know, now you're taking on this journey of leadership through the Scouts movement? So how did it inspire you? What was the core message?
For me, it was mainly to do with resilience, considering they were heavily outnumbered. And one of my friends, he studies history at university, and when I told him about this, he was like, this can't be real. This is like, the way he said, he was like, this is some Lord of the Rings stuff. Like it was just you couldn't believe it. But just to hear it from, you know, being heavily outnumbered, but yet having faith, being starved for 8 months, no food, no resources, but yet they still fought. And in a sense, the Mughal had failed to sort of fail the outcome of capturing Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj, and they didn't. And just, you know, so hearing it once again, like just reminding myself now, it's just really inspiring. And it just shows how powerful like Sikhi really is. It's not just they were just warriors, but it's just that there's the power of the Gurbani that kept them going for so long.
Okay.
Can I just say something on that, Arvind? I'm really proud at what you're doing and impressed at how you've changed and how your life has worked out. The only thing I would like to put like a question is that whenever we now talk about Sikhi, it's always the religious side. Yeah, from what you're saying, how these brave people fought and, you know, they were resilient, they stood up for themselves, they stood up for justice and everything. And yet we never talk about the warriors, the Sikh warriors. To me, in this day and age, you go to the Gurdwara and it's all about have Amrit Shako Sikh Bano, but it's the stories are not properly told. The youth are not that encouraged.
Yeah.
Why? You know, that's my question. Why? Because in the old days, it used to be, you know, there was, you know, we are Sikh saints, soldiers as well. Yeah. But the soldier side is never explored as much as the religious side is. And I feel that the way it's all done is probably why the youth are not that into going to the Gurdwara. Yes, there are loads of children who go, but majority have kind of moved away. I don't know if that's just my opinion, but,
yeah, but
I'm just putting out a question.
Yeah,
How,
that's great.
you know, what do the others feel?
Yeah, let's tell us about your story first of all, Bali. Like, what is it that influences you? What do you hold dearly from Sikhi?
From Sikhi, what holds me dearly is the equality. Like I said earlier, my parents were very, very religious, and I'm the only daughter with two brothers, but my parents always brought me up as a son. They never said, oh, this is a girl, so she should do this or that. You know, like, unlike what Sukhchandan ji was saying, my parents were always, though, you're treated as a boy. You should always stand up for yourself. You should always stand up for justice. Our gurus taught us that, you know, Sikh Singh is a sher and Kaur is a princess. So although you are a princess, and I was brought up, you know, like a son, always independent, always trying to do the right thing, listen to Gurbani, try to understand it. And if you're reading, say, for example, if you're reading Japji Sahib Ji, you should understand the meanings as well, not just recite it. And if you've read it, then you need to follow it. And if you can't follow it, then it's like taking one step at a time rather than saying, oh, you sabere utھ ke sara Japji Sahib da paath kar liya. He said that is not the right way to do it. You do it, you understand it, and you try to follow it. And every time you take another step and another step. So in my life, I've always felt, I've never felt injustice, but if there is, I've always stood up for it. So it's kind of made me a stronger person. And even now, I trained as a Samaritan and I'm doing Samaritan work. I go out, you know, help people. But I don't feel now inspired to go and do something at the Gurdwara, because I feel over the years, my childhood was all spent in the Gurdwaras. But as you grew up, things were happening that were kind of disaffecting. So it's kind of, I mean, like yourself, Jasveer, we used to meet up at the Gurdwara, but I now only go when there is something religious happening. There's an occasion like Vaisakhi or Gurpurb, something like that, rather than going every week.
Yeah, I suppose what you're saying is that, you know, we need to learn and we need to interpret for ourselves rather than following ritualistically. And sometimes if the behavior is simply ritualistic, it loses its meaning. So yeah, okay, I understand. Let me go on to Ramneek, if that's okay with you. Ramneek Singh Ji, tell us about your stories and interpretations and influence and impact on your life.
Sure, thanks for the opportunity. I think I might take a slightly different tack in answering the question, if that's okay. And the reason I say that is because I don't think about it in a specific story sense. I think about the overarching body of Sikh history and the corpus of theology as sort of the way that I reflect on who I've become and my identity. And it was very interesting actually listening to Arvinder Ji talk about his experience and how his upbringing and his experiences in the exposure to those stories about the Four Sahibzade as well as the Sikh camps was influential on his transition into becoming much deeper in Sikhi. And I have a lot of parallels in my own experience in growing up, and that's probably a reflection of if I might be if I might say that, you know, the sort of similarity in our age, or at least in the generational sense, that we come from the sort of the younger age spectrum. And so, you know, when I reflect on how I've become who I have become, I was fortunate in having two very strong female role models in my life that had a very deep conviction in Sikh belief, as well as an understanding of the history. And they were my dadi and my nanny. And so as a young child who had cut his hair, you know, from the age of year 2 here in Australia, I think it would be, you know, in sort of like the about 7 years old or so, and then started growing my hair again from year 8 in Australia. So that's a period of about 6 years difference between where I had my hair cut. The major reason for why that I chose to keep my hair was, you know, when I reflect on the stories, it was because my nanny had spent so much time with me in explaining to me the stories about our rich cultural as well as martial as well as theological heritage, and explaining, you know, several important ideas and instilling the values within me through those stories. So, and I think Dr. Mal, if you know, when I think about the purpose of your research, it is to explore the idea of whether our identity is influenced through stories. And I think in my case, especially, that is extremely true, because the person that you see before you today, like from a physical identity perspective, let alone from an intellectual or cultural perspective, has been definitely strongly driven by story. And when I reflect on what has emerged from me, and, you know, to abstract, I suppose, the answer to your question to that higher level, I think I took away several things from the different stories. So my nanny would tell me the Janam Sakhis of the specific gurus, as well as, you know, the history of martyrs that we have had following the end of the line of, you know, the physical gurus, so to speak, or the physical embodiment of gurus, and then, you know, what the martyrs stood for. And the things that I took away from that in terms of becoming who I am today were conviction in our values. And so we have conviction in, you know, the physical symbols that we wear in terms of the gas, the kara, etc., as well as, you know, the fundamental belief that we are all one. So every species, every person, etc., comes from the unitary, the notion of Waheguru. And so, you know, I took those ideas away, and the implication from those things is that it teaches me several things about, you know, the notion of chardikala and resilience. You know, Arvinder Ji, you talked about how, you know, the Four Sahibzades and the history of our martial experience as a fledgling community fighting against a larger oppressive force with the Mughals, and how we had the conviction in our identity to fight for the ideals of equality and justice, as well as standing up for oppressed peoples. You know, and the resilience to be able to do that when the numbers were significantly stacked against us is something that transcends to my context today, in terms of, you know, choosing to carry on with my physical identity in perhaps more adverse scenarios as a young child, you know, choosing to keep my hair from year 8 onwards, and the kind of, you know, perhaps tacit racism that I experienced when I was, you know, navigating society and things like that. And, you know, and further on from there, I think it's been influential in terms of my choice to then give back to the community. You know, one of Guru Nanak's principles was truthful living, as well as the notion of seva and giving back to the community. And that sort of has been one of the things that I've taken away from those stories about the gurus, as well as, you know, the rich tradition we have following about, you know, who we are as a community. And I think that it's those 3 things that I've taken away and become the person that I am today. Number 1 being the conviction in a strong core value of humanism and equality amongst all, as well as giving back, and then, you know, taking those convictions and then applying them into my life through giving back through community leadership and organizations, as well as a strong focus on integrity and values in my daily life. So yeah, I hope that helps to answer the question. I know I didn't touch on a specific story, but I tried to explain it as well as I could.
It does, Ratmanik Singh Ji, because you talk about how stories have an impact on our identity. And I suppose a great example of that is Maharaja Dalip Singh, who was brought up as a Christian, but then when he, in his adult life, he wanted to go back to being a Sikh. changing the story about his life. Like when his mother came to visit him and she told him a different story about who he was, she said, "You're not a prince, you're a Raja," you know, because they had brought him up to believe that he was a prince. But so in changing his story about his identity, it changed his behavior and what he wanted, what he desired for. So yeah, so thank you very much. Let me go on to Professor Gurchrandaba. Tell us about your stories and influences.
I was thinking about this as you were all speaking. It's really humbling to hear these amazing stories. So I'm going to make a few confessions. So I'm not the most religious person ever, but I'll share the stories of my parents really, because for me, I think the story of migration, and some people shared this in their introduction, is what's really influenced my whole life and career. Because I think there's an inherent tension between religious rituals, if I may, and religious values. And I think it's quite possible to retain religious values even if you don't follow religious rituals. And I think migration has shown that. So I'm not saying my parents did the right thing. I'm just saying they did things that were, and I was this irritating child growing up who kept asking why, which then forced them to have to explain to me why they made compromises. So my father kept telling me, Sikh, he's brilliant. And I said, well, you don't have a turban and a beard. It can't be that brilliant. And then he talked me through very patiently, as I think back on it, about the values, about nam japo, kirat karo, bandh shako, and really started to get me thinking through about the values and worry less about the rituals, to the point that, as other people have highlighted, it meant that conversely, I actually started going to the Gurdwara less as I grew up as a teenager, because what I was seeing at the Gurdwara, I mean this the politest way, were too much issues focused on rituals and less about living via values. But it really did influence me, because then when I got into research, I found that a lot of academics were using religion to try and explain away some of the challenges in our communities. And I just thought, well, that can't possibly be right, because our values are about doing good. It's about positivity, it's about seva, selfless service. So how can it be that people are saying, oh, you know, for example, I do a lot of work on blood and organ donation, and people are saying, oh, I don't want to give my blood, I don't want to give my organs because of my religion. And I thought, well, if you're saving 9 lives, how can saving 9 lives be incompatible with seva? So I think, you know, it's really helped me to start thinking about really focusing on values, less so on rituals, which, as I said, sometimes doesn't land well. But also, you know, it's enabled me in my spare time to work with the Gurdwaras who are interested in thinking as Gurdwaras as being health promoting institutions, whereby we don't just think about physical well-being, but mental well-being. I mean, the amount of mental positivity people can get from just sitting and listening to the Bhat or the Kirtan, or, you know, learning about a healthy langar, maybe doing some exercise classes, maybe doing some yoga, is amazing. But I think there are some tensions. So, you know, as I've said earlier, that, you know, some Gurdwara, you know, some people will say, I only eat these, say, unhealthy foods on special occasions. But the problem for us as Sikhs and Punjabis is we just have a lot of special occasions. So I think it's how do you balance out then fitting in some, I don't know, exercise or some calorie burning activity to accommodate the many special occasions we have. So, you know, I saw my parents make sacrifices. I mean, I think, you know, my dad was a good example. Sort of back when he reached sort of 50 odd, he then felt confident enough, and the UK had changed enough to then grow his beard, his gears, do Amrit again, you know, and volunteered at the Gurdwara. And I think there's a whole generation across the world who made compromises. But for me, the story is they didn't compromise on their values. But I felt sadly they were judged by certain people within Sikhi, but this is true of all religions, because they were seen to have compromised on their religion, whereas I don't think they did. I think they did the best thing possible for their families in the UK, the best thing possible for their families back in India, because what they were trying to do is they were trying to do selfless service for lots of people all at the same time.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Gurj. I just want to emphasize that the project is called Learn to Lead, and the focus is on learning, which is Sikh. You know, for me, the interpretation of Sikhi, it's that the core has to be about learning. That's what Baba Guru Nanak Ji taught us. It's about learning. And so if we are learning, and if we're following the principles that we were taught, like Seva and Bandh, you know, bandh ki shako, all of those principles, I believe that, you know, it's not right to say we're not religious, because we are following the principles, we're following the values, and you know, the Gurdwara can be our own homes, our own living room can be the Gurdwara if that's where we are choosing to learn and to worship and to find ways of contributing what we have. You know, so just wanted to say that, you know, the focus here is not about religion as such, it's more about the values and the learning. Sorry, go ahead.
What Panji said, I haven't got her name, your friend from London.
Bali.
So
Balbir.
Balbir, Auntie. So what Balbir Panji said earlier about warrior culture not being taught and more stress on religion, and what Professor Randhawa just pointed out, I think there is a problem there that the stress on the warrior stories in the, I would say, post-1947 generations was systematic, because if you notice, at least that was the case in Punjab, that the stories which were disseminated in the Sikh community post-1947 related mainly to the 18th century period where Sikhs were fighting the Mughals or the Muslims. And that is how those stories were presented, that the Sikhs and the Muslims are enemies. And that's the post-1947 situation where Pakistan and India were at loggerheads, and they were ready for wars. And the first war they fought was in 1948 in Kashmir. So it served the powers that those stories should be stressed. But the stories before 18th century, they were pushed back, and the stories post 18th century were again pushed out of the scene. So what it did, it pushed us away from those stories which were going to give us the values, which Professor Randhawa referred to, that those values which were making us the warriors, not just the warriors, but saint soldiers. So the saint part was lost somewhere and soldier part remained, because that is what the government, whether they were British in colonial times or the Indian government after 47, they wanted to take advantage of. So that's one aspect of it, but just stressing the soldier aspect doesn't give us the values which guide that soldier's sword. And that is where the problem started, that those who were practicing Sikhs, who were Amritari or initiated Sikhs, they started judging the others, because they could claim to be the warriors, they could claim to be to have the knowledge of the values as well, whether they did or not. Because in my experience and in my research of the post-47 history, many of the Amritari Sikhs did not really practice the values because of the instances of corruption and compromises on religious values and everything. I can cite a few examples, but maybe later. So that confusion is where the fissures in the community structures came in, especially because of the trauma of 1947. the families traumatized and migrating in really, really tough circumstances to UK and other places, the only focus is to make the future of the family better. And there, the religious aspect of keeping your body through Bana, that took a back seat. And that is completely understandable. And if the stories of Guru Nanak had been told along with the 18th century warrior stories, then it shouldn't have been an issue, because when Guru Nanak goes to Makkah to talk to or see how the Muslims practice their religion at the center of their faith, he goes as a Muslim. He dons the garb of the Muslim. So there is no doubt in our community's history that as the need arises, I won't say that that should be the first choice, that take the easy path and compromise on your identity. But if somebody has done it, then we shouldn't be sitting in judgment, because Guru Granth Sahib teaches us that hum nahi change bura nahi koi. So if we are judging others, then we are assuming ourselves to be above them, that I am way better than you, and I'm now judging you as no, you are not true to the faith. So that would have come in if the structures had been maintained, and passing on of Sikhi from one generation to the next had actually happened in its purity. And I am pleasantly surprised that Panti Balbir has been speaking so highly of her father, and same with Professor Randhawa, because it is very rare nowadays, I would say, for my generation to speak of their parents as role models. Whereas the previous generations, there were actually role models that I can see my great-grandparents or grandparents as role models. But if I talk about my parents, then I look at, oh, they were doing this wrong, or they were doing that wrong. That at least is a situation in Punjab. So this is just my thought on how you're feeling. So there is kind of a whole history in how people were judging each other and why they were doing it, if that makes sense.
It does.
Thank you.
It does. Thank you very much for asking. Yeah, very, very thoughtful. And again, it goes back to this concept of oneness. If we, in our identity, it's a very strong notion of this interconnectedness, then we wouldn't judge anybody else, because we know that we are part and parcel of that entity.
Yeah. Yes.
So let me go on to Sukhjinder Ji. Sukhjinder Kaur Ji.
Dr. Malji, but can I quickly?
Yes, of course.
I just need to. I have another engagement to attend to. Can I? I'm going to have to apologize to everyone, but I do have to drop off the call. But it's been a pleasure speaking to everybody, and I look forward to seeing the recording and the follow up from the research. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Speak soon. Okay, Sukhjinder Kaur Ji.
Yeah, with me, it's not necessarily sort of one story or one Saki, but an amalgamation of several stories. And I think for me, my journey starts with Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj's core principles of Naam Japana, Vandaki Shakna, and Kirat Karna, because I think once we own that and make it part of who and what we are, then everything else sort of falls into place in its own way. And I don't think it sort of stops within the four walls of our own home or the Gurdwara, but in our entire being and in the society and the circles that we move in. And for me, being honest to myself, if I can't be truthful with myself about who or what I am and what I follow, then how can I possibly be truthful to anybody else out there? So it's not just a case of langars in the Gurdwara, but helping those that are less fortunate. And I don't mean having sort of food drives and langar drives, as we see, we've seen a lot of, especially over the last sort of 12, 18 months. But even on a very micro scale, where we know somebody might be in need, or somebody might be hungry, somebody's lost their wallet or whatever, you know, doing the right thing and stepping up and helping others, and not being judgmental. But if somebody needs an ear or a shoulder to lean on or cry on, to be that person, and it doesn't matter what color, creed, religion. It's about being a good human being. And for me, those are Guru Nanak Dev Ji's core messages. And I think for most of us, that is the starting point. And it's about baby steps. And I'm often been heard, not only just in the Gurdwara, but on my TV shows, saying, you know what, let's not judge each other. Let's take baby steps. God is our Father, and each one of us is his children, and each one of us has a right to have that relationship. I mean, I'm one of 3 kids. My brothers have a different relationship with my parents as I do, but each one of us has our own unique relationship with the higher being, and we should be entitled to have that. And God's hand will guide us because he's there watching us, guiding us, helping us make the right decisions. We don't always make the right decisions, but then, you know, we have to take ownership of that. So for me, it's a journey that we embark on, some of us consciously and some of us unconsciously. And we should continue on that journey and hopefully learn and improve as we go along, and you know, share who we are with people we meet in other walks of life. Let them know who we are. And once people, as I was listening to a young lad, Arvinder, he said once he shared it with a friend that's studying history, oh, well, that can't be right. When we go out there and we drip feed and we're happy to share Guruji's Sakya and who we are, where we're from, why we look different, if we do look different. And I've sort of lived in Canada, the United States, as well as England. And oftentimes I found myself in communities where we were the only brown family, if I can call it that. And it's about explaining, why did my daughter have long hair? Why do we all wear gadas? And I think people respect you if you're not sort of in their face and shoving it down their throat, but you're drip feeding them. And then the respect becomes a mutual respect and an understanding. And you grow from that, and they grow and learn from that as well. So it's for me, yeah, I could pick up on one Saki, but there's just so many. Where do you start? I mean, I look at things like, you know, Bhagat Tannaji and Bhagat Ravidasji, and all I see and hear in this, what they have to say is love for a much, much higher power. And it's about knowing, and even though sometimes we feel we can't see that higher power, or we question whether it's there, it's about having that faith. It's about knowing there's someone out there watching over us and going with it. Because I've often said, if Sikhi had another name, it would be love. And then Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj says, Sach kaho sun leo sabe, chin prem kiyo then he prapayo. So it's about spreading the love. And for me, I would say irrespective of color, creed, and religion.
Okay, thank you very much, Sukhjinder Kaurji. Just wanted to make a point there about that. Sometimes when we tell our stories, the language that we tell these stories in, some things get lost in translation, because I think one of the fundamental aspects of Sikhi is equality. And when we refer to Waheguru, it's a neutral entity. It's neither male or female. But when we speak about Waheguru in English, I find that we can refer to God as he. And, because we're so much influenced by the Christian way of referring to God as he. And I think that's something that we need to be conscious of. It's that when we are speaking in English, it's very easy to refer to God as though it's a masculine entity, whereas Sikhi teaches us that it's neutral, it's formless.
true.
See, that's why I was saying, you know, like when I was raised as an equal, and throughout life, you know, you live like as an equal, treat other people as at your level. Always, you know, like we say, God is within you. So something that Mr. Randhawa said, you know, your home can be your Gurdwara. You know, you don't have to be a practicing Sikh to go to the Gurdwara, because the perception these days is that if you don't go to the Gurdwara, you're not a proper Sikh. But Sikhi is from within. You are a human being, and you've got to treat others like you would like to be treated yourself. So be kind. And our religion is very, very practical when you compare it to other religions. And that is really what I find inspiring, and something that has helped me in my life to achieve what I have achieved. Not much, but whatever it is, it's because I was brought up believing in myself, believing you've got to be kind to other people, treat others, don't judge, always be practical. And our gurus, like all our gurus, they got married. They didn't kind of just live on their own and become saints in the jungle. They lived practically, and they taught us how we should live. And, you know, listening to a lot of stories, I think it's very inspiring. Everybody's got a different take on it, but the values and the principles, whether we are practicing Sikhs or not, we all practice them in our real life.
Yes, and I think, believe, like, no one has a monopoly on values. Like we can talk about Christian values, we can talk about Sikhi values, but values are values. And I think as human beings, when you talk, you know, because you do work for the Samaritans, when you talk about treat others the way you would like to be treated, you know, we can think of that as a very distinct Christian value, to treat, you know, love your neighbor as yourself. But it's not limited by by Christianity. We also believe that, you know, Muslims would believe that. I think it's part of this thing of compassion, that to have compassion for other life, we need to treat them the way, you know, we need to feel the pain of others, I suppose. Is one way of saying it. Okay, well, thank you. Let me go on to Sukhdeep Randhawa ji. I just, I did notice earlier that we have two Randhawas
We do
today.
Hello, fellow Randhawa Gurch. How are you?
Yeah, are you related?
I don't know. I was thinking that I might have to reach out to Gurch and find out.
Yeah. Yes, you might be. You know, you probably come from the same bend.
Some small clan. Yeah.
So Sukhi, tell us about your take.
Yeah, I've been making notes as we go along in terms of evolving my thinking around stories. So stories are, I think, are powerful for communities if communities have that ability to communicate. And I think as a group of people, as Sikhs, the Bandh, I think we've been very weak in communicating our stories, not within our own group, but outside our group, right? I think that's one of the biggest weaknesses we've had, and that's getting better though, with animated movies that we touched upon earlier on, with videos being made, whether it's in Punjab or by Bollywood. But I think for me, there's been a real passion about getting the word out of what it means to be Sikh. And so therefore, you know, to answer your question specifically, what one story would I touch? And I don't think there is one story for me. And as it was said earlier on, I think there's an amalgamation, as said before, of stories that helps me understand who I am and who I should be because there has been a lineage of people before me from Sikhi, from the Bandh, who have done some amazing things, right? We don't get to hear these amazing things in our schools and universities because we live in the Western world. I guess the question in my mind is, do we hear those stories in our universities in India, in Punjab? I don't know. But the point is, I think it all distills down to all these stories, whether it's the gurus, whether it's, Jassa Singh Azalwalia or Banda Singh Bahadur, all these individuals. And but mainly, in my mind, they have been male. And I want to see more because I've got a 17-year-old daughter sitting over there, and I tell her as much as I know about sort of Sikh female leaders and stories. But it all distills down to me to one thing, which we are here as a force for good. That's my take on it. We don't have a monopoly on this. But I think we've lost our way. But individually, I think we can still look at these stories and then decide how we take or implement those in our lives and in our communities and in our families. So I think, but there are certain stories I have subtracted from the kind of whole range of Sikh stories, the stories of supernatural happenings, right? So I'll be very clear, I am not religious. I believe in a God, I am a Sikh, but I also question a lot of things as well. So I take some of those supernatural stories that I've heard within Sikhism and I question them because I have to. I can't take it on face value. But that's my view and how I think it's how I've distilled it down in terms of being a force of good.
Well, I suppose stories are there for the power of the story is in the meaning. And as you know, being a coach yourself, is that it's all about the meaning that you make from that, the interpretations that you derive from the story, whatever the story is. If it's a supernatural story, it's like, what is the underlying meaning of that? Does it have any power? And I think the second thing that you raised is this thing about, I think sometimes people can get too attached to the stories. And when we become too attached to a very narrow story, that can be very limiting in our leadership. We're not agile enough. We don't, it's like wearing, being an actor and always wearing the same robe and not being able to be versatile enough to take on different roles. That's what I noticed when I first asked everyone what their favorite stories were. And I think I've spoken to about 35 people so far. And from the stories that I gained from them, it's that there were very few stories of creativity. There were very few stories of you know, the non-traditional, like the non-classic, the like stories about humor, you know, like why is humor not as powerful as something else like conformity, for example? Yeah, and we know that we need a balance in life in order to, you know, for us to have sustainable lives that are meaningful and also enjoyable and also, you know, good to live, basically. Like life isn't always meant to be a chore, is it?
No, just one last thing before you move on. For me, another thing that's important for me is to be seen as a leader, but also as someone who comes from the Sikh community, a Sikh leader. So when I see the gentleman on this call here today, Sardars, there is a certain emotion that stirs in me, which is quite powerful. When you see the CEO of GoDaddy who's a Sardar, and other people, you know, who out in the corporate world, that is very important for me because they are leaders, hopefully. They are representing their community, but also are basing their leadership on some Sikh stories. I'm sure they are because we've all been influenced. Me being a non-Amadari Sikh is one of the things that I'm challenging myself on myself. But I guess what I'm saying is having an outward appearance as a Sikh leader is very important, I think.
Exactly. And you see, today we focused on stories, and this is only the start of our conversation. In the next conversation, in the next discussion that we have, I'd like to focus on symbology. So the symbols, the bag, you know, how the symbol of a bag, how much power is there in shaping our identities? The karam, the khanda, you know, the different symbols that we use to empower us. What is their importance? But I think, let me know how you feel. You know, whoever's got anything more to say, please do say it. But I think maybe we've covered as much as we need to cover in one discussion, because a couple of people have had to leave already. Yeah, go ahead, Vipal Singh ji.
One comment on the miracles in the stories associated with the gurus. As you research our history, what we find out is that the first Janam Sakhi, which is known as the Kolbrook Janam Sakhi or Hafzabad Janam Sakhi, it has absolutely no chamatkar in the stories they tell. It is simple stories about Guru Nanak's life. The chamatkar part comes in, the miracles, the supernatural, that comes in Bhai Bala Janam Sakhi, which is kind of written by the non-Sikhs, Handaliyas, who wanted, and you will be shocked also that in Bhai Bala Janam Sakhi, they present Guru Nanak as coming in to announce the arrival of Baba Handal, who they show as bigger than Guru Nanak. Now, the problem was complicated when the printing press came into Punjab. The Janam Sakhi that was printed out and distributed in its thousands was by Bala Janam Sakhi. So whatever was in that Janam Sakhi became our kind of oral tradition. And it's not really, again, to understand how it happened. Because if we understand how it happened, then we can also understand why it happened and kind of get rid of it. So if the Colebrook Janam Sakhi is studied or read, then there is nothing that is chamatkari or that contradicts the principles enunciated in Guru Granth Sahib. And the other factor that you said, Dr. Mal, about the enjoyment part, the humorous stories. I think the point is that when you ask somebody which story inspires you, I'll be surprised if somebody says that this joke inspired me or that humorous story inspired me. But in Guru Granth Sahib, there is, in fact, stress on entertainment or taking it easy. That the line that I remember is, Nanak Satgur Petya Puri Hove Jo Hasandya Khilandya Penandya Khavandya Viche Hove Mo. And so the fifth Guru is saying that Hasdya Khedya Kapde Pondya Roti Khandya. When we are doing these things, that's just doing these things, we will attain mukti. So they don't say that don't hasso na khedo na, ja change kapde na pao, ja ye bhi changi khuraak na khao. So what they are saying is keep doing these activities, and while doing it, you will attain mukti, salvation. So it's kind of seeing everything interconnected and as a whole that we would truly understand what Sikhi is all about. Thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking of people like Rumi. You know, Rumi is internationally famous, and a lot of Rumi's poetry, it's very funny, and you can learn a lot through that. Can be inspiring as well. We can sometimes learn from a very humorous way of presenting reality.
Yeah, you're right. But I think the problem has started with the destruction of our education system when in 1849 the British took over. And when they planted the education system that they wanted and the outcomes from that system that they wanted, it replaced our education system at that time, which was responsible for 97% literacy, according to the book by a British writer written in 1882 or 83. I think his name was G.W. Lightner, or if I'm not getting it wrong. So he says that at the time that we destroyed the Sikh kingdom, there was 97% literacy, and maths and Punjabi and other subjects. He says that the books were sent to the village Zaildar, or the leader of the Pind, and they then, even women were highly educated in that sense. So when that system was destroyed and the system that supplanted it, that's what we see today. The character that we have, it's not really creation of the gurus. It is what we have been able to salvage through the system, the grind that we go through.
Absolutely. Yes, I've heard as well that during Maharaja Ranjit Singh's time, he had a very high level of literacy. At least 80% were literate, and it might have been as high as you say, over 90%. So again, this is part of the importance of having a culture that is strong, that we learn about our own history, not through our own lens, not through the lens of others who don't have that inner understanding, I suppose. Is there anybody else who needs to say anything, to add anything more to the discussion so far? Or shall we wrap up for today? Okay, well, thank you. Yeah. Shall we wrap up for today? We've said a lot already, haven't we? Bali, I missed what you said.
No, I said, yeah, we can wrap up for today.
Wrap up today.
Lovely to hear all of you.
Absolutely.
Amazing stuff you've gone through. And there's just so much from different people that I can relate to. So it's not like one person's opinion that, oh yeah, that person is right or that person is wrong. There are snippets from everybody's voice that has come through that I feel, oh yeah, I agree with that. That's been part of my life too. And so I think thank you for that.
Yeah, we learn from hearing, we learn through discussion and through hearing perspectives that are not totally 100% in alignment with our own, because if they were, then there is nothing to learn. We learn by seeing things from another perspective. So thank you very much for sharing, and in the true spirit of seva and bandh ke shako, I think, you know, one way of doing seva is through langar, another way of doing seva is food for the soul. I suppose, you know, maybe we don't focus as much as we need to on feeding our souls. And I think this discussion is one of the ways that we can be adding to that conversation about nurturing our souls, as it were. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.